Hello, art historians. So today we will be doing our final lesson on prehistoric art. And we are still in the Middle East. Our last image that we did was the ibex beaker. And this is the anthropomorphic stele or stele. It depends on how you were taught and who you were taught and where you were taught. Some people call them steles, some people call them stele, some people call them stellas. It's really, it has a lot to do with who your teacher was. So anthropomorphic stele, and anthropomorphic means human-like. And so what you see here is a tall, 3 feet tall, human-like figure. Stelae are often considered to be grave markers or route markers. And so what you're looking at here is a piece from the Arabian Peninsula. And what is really important about this piece is this is the earliest, it's an early Monday morning, and that was a little bit of a yawn. It's the earliest known work of art from the Arabian Peninsula. And so when we're dealing with the College Board making its decision about what 250 works of art they believe are the most important, here is where we come down to. It's human-like. It is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, known works of art from the Arabian Peninsula. And you're dealing with an area of the world that was critically important to trade and the spread of information, the spread of spices, the spread of just general personal things. And so this guy is really important. So let's talk about him. Anthropomorphic stele. This is your one image from the Arabian Peninsula, the 4th millennium BCE. Now, he is made out of sandstone, sort of that gray, the sort of like brownish, grayish sandstone, as opposed to our ambum stone, which is much more gray and is made out of gray whack. So you're sort of getting this concept of what the various shades of sandstone are. We will even see red sandstone later when we do Egypt. And so we have to sort of think about what we're looking at and what color it is to help us remember our materials. Remember, the sandstone is incredibly hard to carve. And so, we see that there was definitely effort put into the creation of this piece. Giving you a minute to finish copying your information. And then we can move ahead for just 1 second. And we're going to look at this next, piece here. So what you're looking at is, this is the Arabian Peninsula, and Ha'il is where this was located. And so this gives you a good idea of what we're looking at. And here are some close-ups of some pieces that I'd like you to look at. So your themes here are anthropomorphic images, things that are human-like but not exactly human, things that are more stylized. Also stele, we will see lots of them. And so we're going to come back. We see this little guy right here. We see this here. We'll go back and look at the whole. And so this is what you're looking at. So stele are often associated with religious or burial practices. But this guy is sort of interesting because he is not only located near a necropolis, but also on important trade routes. And so the belief is that he not only marks spaces for the dead, but he also marks routes to move materials from Asia into Europe. So what you see him there with, this little loop right here, is the top of his robe. This is a sash, like a military sash. And this is a belt with a double-bladed sword. And so what you see, this is the Layanites are a people that ruled. You don't need to know that, this area. But what happens is that those people developed very complex, very original artistic traditions that look like this. These are anthropomorphic, resembling human forms, but not themselves exactly human. You can identify that it is meant to look human-like, but it doesn't have all the characteristics of a human. Now, what's interesting is we also know that this route that this marks would have been highly traveled. He is carved in the round, and it would have been a highly traveled route, but is less traveled now because of natural climate change. Much like what we saw with the running horned woman that is now in desert area, this would have been in something that was a little more fertile, but is now a mostly desert area as well. So you're looking at, sort of an important, impressive memorial to the dead and to mark important trade routes. And so these let us know what early man was doing, even when they weren't able to let us know in a written language. Okay. So this is our anthropomorphic stele. And our last image in prehistory is this jade Kong. I'll give you 2 seconds to copy your stuff, more than 2 seconds, clearly. Liangzhu, China, 3300 to 2200 BCE. There are a bunch of them that were found at this time period. And so that's why you have such a large sort of time period there. This is carved in jade, which is, again, incredibly difficult to carve. So early man was not just picking, the easiest stuff. Now, did they probably also carve in things that were easier to carve? Probably, but it's likely that because many of these things were associated with burial, many, possibly hundreds of things that might have been carved in things that were softer may actually have been lost because of the softness of the material. They may have degraded over time. And so what we're left with are the things that are much more durable: sandstone, jade, stuff like that. Okay, so it's carved jade. It's almost 2 inches high. And you can see the top, it's 3.5 inches in diameter. I'm going to switch to the next page really quickly so that you can see that the reason that I talk about this date gap is because there are tons of them, little small ones like ours, taller ones. And what is not as clear in ours is a little more clear in this one, is that on the corners are faces. And so I give you this sort of close up here because this one, the face is very easy to see. You can see the eyes, the nose, the mouth. Okay, and you can see even in the profile that there was definitely a lot of effort put into carving these to look the way that they do. So what you're looking at here, when we go back and look at our guy, is there are definitely faces there. They're just a little more difficult to see. So let's talk about what exactly we're looking at. A Kong is a tube that has a circular inner section and then a square outer section. And so I'll go back and look at these tall ones again. See the round here and then the square there, the round center section, square outer section, round intersection, square outer section. And you can see it here. Here's that round inner area. And they're hollow. They go all the way. The hole goes all the way through. So it's not like you're looking at a cup. The hole goes all the way through. And then the outer surface is usually divided both vertically and horizontally so that you have sort of images on the square and images on the flat part that helps to form the circle. Now, what's really, really cool about this is jade is an ornamental rock. It was used a lot in prehistoric periods for carving. It has the same sort of hardness as like a quartz or stuff like that. But it's tough. It is resistant to breaking. You see a lot of like dark green jade being used in jewelry, bracelets, things like that, because it is pretty substantial and can withstand a lot of banging. Early writings that come up after the Chinese culture develops an alphabet talks about the Kong being symbolic of of the earth, while the B, the hole in the center, okay, so the Kong itself is the square, and then the hole in the center is called the B, and it represents the heaven. So with the square representing the earth and the circle representing heaven, you have sort of this, they are sort of like a representation of like a cosmic relationship between, you know, the earth and heaven and the gods and man. What's the most interesting about these is how they were carved. So we have to remember that we don't have a ton of metal tools yet, because there are writings after this area, after this time period about jade Kongs, we have some more information about them. And so what you're looking at is what prehistoric man would have done is they would have taken basically string or twine, or some sort of plant fiber-like thing that would be like rope, and they would roll it in something incredibly sticky, tar, stuff like that, bitumens, things like that. And then they would roll it in sand. And so what you had was a string that was completely covered in sand. And then you would stick that string against this line right here, or against this line right here, and you would pull it back and forth, rub back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that sand on the string would then carve a line into these areas where you wanted a strong line to be carved. They would also take pieces of bamboo and dip just the end in something sticky and put sand that way and rub back and forth, so it becomes like sandpaper. And that's how they were able to smooth some of these other edges. But think about how much time is used here to cut and abrade and polish and all that stuff. And it's uniform. So we're looking at, this was very difficult. It would have required immense time, serious dedication, complete skill. There's serious effort that goes on here. So I remind you again that just because we don't have a written language doesn't mean we aren't a sophisticated civilization. Now, this one that they give you dates to 3300 to 2200 BCE. But what's interesting about jade Kongs is there are examples of working in jade. There are examples of Kongs that date back to 6000 BCE. So why do they give you this one? Because this is the earliest one that is really like the best example. It's not the oldest, but it's like the earliest, really best example to show you where we sort of flipped that switch and they become significantly more complex. And, you know, you have this idea that you're looking at the earth and heavens. So you have, again, like the Tlatelolco figure, that duality, heaven and earth. Life and death. Why life and death? Because these were found in burial mounds. So we're talking grave goods again. So clearly we believe that there's some other thing when we're burying important things that take us so much time to create. We clearly believe that there's something that happens after death if we put these things into pits and things like that with the dead. This one, like I said, is only almost 2 inches high, but you're looking at some that are much taller, a foot and a half, some of them. The faces sometimes are animalistic, so that word is zoomorphic, that have sort of animal characteristics. You also have some that are anthropomorphic, so human faces. And so we're not sure with that, whether those are deities, ancestors, spirits, again, because we do have some information about how they were created that was written after, but we don't have any written information that tells us exactly what these faces were or what the purpose of them was. But we do know that based on how Chinese culture evolved, that jade continued to be part of burials of high-ranking people. Jade continued to be found in necropolises. Jade continued to be buried with the dead, and jade was linked to like that idea of heaven and earth, life and death, duality of nature, and of beauty and the connection of beauty to nature. And so we're looking at the beginnings of what becomes, as we will study when we get to Southeast and Southeast Asia, what becomes an amazing artistic and complex civilization in China. And we will see that, and I want to make sure that I don't just make it sound like we're going to see that in China. We will go and we will see how this eventually becomes pottery and how this eventually becomes large scale sculptures. But it's not just that. When we get to doing West and Central Asia, which includes what we call the Middle East, we will see how these images, sort of these geometrics, begin to become part of that artistic campaign. This idea on the Ibex speaker, some of these geometrics and these, these organic shapes, and how these nature shapes almost become a pattern in themselves. That will become clear in Islamic art that we will study. So what we're seeing is the beginnings of what will become incredibly complex artistic campaigns. Some of what we will see from the Maya and the Aztec will be clearly similar to what we see here with Tlatilco figures. And we will begin to see some of these same forms, the geometric forms and the facial forms. We'll begin to see those later in other pieces that will appear in Mayas and Aztecs and Incas. When we come back to the Oceania, we will absolutely look at how some of these early patterns become then transferred to bark cloth and even human skin through tattooing. So the reason that they choose many of these pieces is they sort of give us a preview as to what these cultures will later create. And when we talk about Africa, even though these are marks on stone, we will begin to see the same sort of importance culturally of animals and ceremonies and things like that in some of the pieces that we will study later. Here we see the importance of astronomy and the calendar and dates and the sun. And that will be something that will be appearing over and over and over and over again in the construction of buildings that are set so that the four corners point to the four directions, buildings that are set so that the door to the building is directly in line with the summer solstice. We begin to become influenced by early man's creations. And this sort of thing here that we see in Running Horned Woman, this composite view, this odd stylized human standing, that carries through that attempt to show motion in the human form. I mean, people are still attempting to put human bodies, when they paint them or draw them, in a way that looks like that person is moving. How do you imply movement in something that is clearly static? Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. And then as we review these animals, we will continue to look at how the creation of, the drawing of, the picturing of animals becomes important across time. And so as we look at all of these things, the human form is one that we will revisit over and over and over and over again. And so the College Board and Mrs. Horman, with the addition of the Woman of Willendorf, chose a group of objects that clearly shows that there is a progression from these early prehistoric things, even all the way through to modern art. And so they did a really good job of collecting a group of artworks from around the world during the prehistoric age to show where art began and how it influences us today. So that is the end of prehistory. And we will do our 9 block and we'll take our test. And then we will begin ancient Mediterranean, which is often a favorite. We will do the ancient Near East, the Assyrians, Babylonians, go with those guys. We'll do ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome. So that's where we're headed next. And that is the end of prehistory.